Hey, if you're fed up with having underperforming tomato plants and you're trying to grow bigger and grow better this year, you're gonna wanna stick around for this whole video. Or maybe you've never grown anything before and you're just looking to start off on the right foot. We're gonna cover some of our favorite tips for a more abundant harvest, how to not only get larger tomatoes, but to get more tomatoes per plant. We're also gonna talk about a couple different reasons that we recommend using mulch in your gardens, the mulch that we use and what's worked really well for us, and what we're doing this year to ensure success. And lastly, we've got a big old surprise to share with you at the end of the video, so make sure you stick around. If you've been growing tomatoes for a while, then you probably already know this, but not all tomato breeds are created equal. They're basically broken into three categories. You have your indeterminate tomatoes, which is everything we're growing this year, determinate tomatoes, and semi-determinate. What those terms mean, indeterminate is a vining tomato and it's going to continue to grow until either it runs out of nutrients or the frost and colder weather cut it off. Determinate tomatoes are bushing tomatoes, so they're the tomatoes that you commonly see people using cages with, and they have a set amount of fruit, they have a set height that they're going to get to, and there's really no amount of pruning or anything that you can do to produce more fruit off of them. And a semi-determinate is still a bushing tomato, but they're able to produce a little bit more than the standard determinates. If you're just getting started, I would recommend starting maybe with determinate tomatoes because they are a little bit easier to grow. They require less maintenance. While you kind of establish your bearings and figure out how tomatoes grow and work, that's a good place to start. Today, we're primarily going to be talking about indeterminate though, because that's what we're growing this year. And like I said, they do require a little bit more maintenance, but they produce probably 5 times more fruit or more, and we're trying to get as much as we can out of the season. So with an indeterminate tomato, and the varieties that we're growing this year are beefsteak, black brandywine, Amish paste, and cherry tomato, what's it called? Sun sugar. In order to understand, because there is a lot of pruning required with these, to be able to do it the right way, you have to really understand how a tomato works and how it grows. Now with every kind of tomato, they produce a hormone called auxin. And what auxin does is when you start to see flowers and little buds coming up at the top, it's basically auxin sends a signal to the rest of the plant, telling it to focus all of its energy into growing fruit. So if you're getting those early in the season, I usually like to pick them off. I even had some showing up when they were still in pots under our grow lights. The reason that those showed up at that time is because the roots get bound up and there's no more room for them to grow down in the little 4-inch pods. If there's no more room for the roots to grow, the plant is basically saying, all right, we need to create fruit now because this is as big as we can get. Now that these are in the ground, I'm starting here and there to notice different little buds popping up on the top, some little flowers. With this being an indeterminate tomato, I want it to grow all the way up these cages here, or all the way up these trellises, I should say. If I just let it start creating fruit now, it's going to significantly slow down how fast this tomato can grow. So I pick those off, and when I do that, that auxin is able to redirect the energy of the plant into growing vertical growth instead of producing fruit. Now we want it to obviously produce that fruit later in the season, but I want the plant to get as big as it can so that there's a lot more offshoots for it to be able to produce as much fruit as possible. Another thing to think about, especially early on in the growth stages, is what's called suckers. Now suckers are essentially a brand new tomato plant that's popping off the main stem, and it usually looks like a V coming off of that main stem. And if you keep those on, sure, they're going to produce fruit, but typically the fruit on the rest of the plant is going to be smaller. Growing these heirloom beefsteak brandywine tomatoes, I'm looking for like a 1 or 2 pound tomato. So I make sure to cut all of those suckers off early on so that once I am ready to have them start producing fruit, it's going to direct all of that energy into the fruit instead of trying to grow a whole extra tomato plant. I'm pruning a lot off of these, so you might be able to see on camera, maybe not. There were all of these offshoots and new stems trying to come out, suckers too. I want there to be as much airflow as possible. Tomatoes love airflow, and if I let this get all bushy down here, the airflow is going to decrease and it's not going to be as healthy of a plant. I also am always thinking about if there's any stems or leaves touching the ground. Tomatoes are super susceptible to illness and disease. The best way for them to get a disease is by having leaves touch the ground or having the rainwater splash up onto the leaves and get dirt and fungus on them. I try to keep this whole pathway here super clear. You can see on all the plants, totally clear on the very bottom, and it's usually, probably 6 inches up before I let stems start to grow. When you are pruning tomato plants, regardless of the size, I'd recommend never pruning off more than 1/3 of the total volume of the plant. If you do that, you run a risk of sending the plant into shock just because it's such a drastic change to the nutrients that it needs, and it sometimes doesn't know how to handle it. So stick to that 1/3 rule and you should be golden. You can probably see on every plant that I have here, I've used these little elastic bands that I actually ordered from M.I. Gardner. I'm using those to train the plant to the trellis. A lot of these wanted to grow outwards and away from the trellis, and I don't want to have to bend them way back when they get bigger and risk snapping the stem. As soon as they're tall enough to hit this trellis, I'm tying them to that and directing their growth up it. And as it grows, because it's going to be very heavy with a lot of tomatoes on there, I want the trellis to be supporting that weight instead of the stem. The higher it gets, I keep using these bands to control every offshoot. Mastering the art of pruning is really the key to getting your plants to grow where and as much as you want them to. Now I just went and got the hose to give the tomatoes some water, and that brings up the final point that I wanted to make. This is probably the most common mistake that I see. I know I made it for years. A lot of people just put their sprinkler on their garden and don't realize that tomato plants really don't like water on the leaves. So I'm always gonna underwater tomatoes. And when I say underwater, I mean water the bottom of the plant. We have ours mulched, so I'll usually take the hose wand and just soak the mulch at the base of the plant for 30 or 45 seconds to give them a good deep watering. But I make sure when I am putting a sprinkler on the garden that it's not overly hitting the tomatoes. Now, next up, we want to talk to you about mulching. There's a lot of varying opinions on this, and I'm only one of them. Mulching essentially is just taking a layer of material and putting it around your plants or over your whole garden, and it acts as a barrier to the soil to protect it from sunlight and rainwater. This year we're using shredded leaves, and what mulching does is you're basically putting a layer of preferably organic material over your soil next to your plants, around your plants I should say, and that's going to act as a barrier for weeds. It's going to insulate the ground to maintain the soil temperature better, and it's going to hold moisture a whole lot better than just standard soil is going to. Now, if you walk into the woods and kind of observe the way that Mother Nature takes care of the ground, you're not going to see any bare spaces on the ground in the forest. Ground doesn't like to be uncovered. As I mentioned with the tomatoes, you don't overly want to get rainwater splashing up onto them. Obviously they need to drink and they need water, but the leaves prefer to not have water on them, and that's a really great way for disease to spread. So if you put a barrier over the soil around your plants, you're actually defending them from splashback, putting a material on the ground that's going to catch that water and act as kind of a shield for your plant. Another thing it's going to do is it's going to block the sunlight for the weeds. The weeds aren't able to photosynthesize. So if you put a good thick layer, typically about 2 inches thick, you're not going to have a weed problem directly around your plants, and you're not going to have weeds stealing nutrients from your plants. A couple things people will use to do this is grass clippings. So if you mow your yard, all the clippings that are left behind. We did that last year and I actually really liked the results, but we experimented with the shredded leaves too. I've noticed a notable difference this year in how much looser and darker the soil is where we had put the leaves last year. So I'm using that across the board this year. You can also use wood chips. Wood chips take a little bit longer to break down. I like to have nice, soft, loose soil, and the wood chips, it'll get there eventually, but it definitely takes a bit longer. So we've got 3 really strong benefits, right? The mulching is going to reduce the amount of weeds you're having to deal with. It's going to maintain the temperature of your soil, and it's also going to retain moisture so that you're not having to water your plants as often.
All right, so we had to introduce you to the newest member of our family. His name's Hammy, and he's a puppy we got from the Amish. Hammy's going to be helping us to keep everyone in line around the farm, and we're super excited to watch him grow up with the kids. As usual, thank you so much for checking out our video. We hope you were able to learn something new. If you did like it, make sure to check out the one in the corner of the screen, and don't forget to hit subscribe.